On the agenda, we have two main items. We're going to look at MNPS Reimagined. As Dr. Battle said earlier in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, that's the next iteration of MNPS Next. And I know the board has been asking, is anxious to hear about our latest thinking, our current thinking around there. And that conversation is going to be led by Dr. Elisa Norris. She is our Executive Officer for Strategy and Performance Management. The second half of the meeting will focus on the current work that exists in our schools of innovation, and that presentation will be led by our Chief of Innovation, Dr. Sharon Griffin. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Norris. Last thing that I will say is our next Teaching and Learning Committee meeting, as a reminder, is scheduled for March the 24th, and that will focus on the STEAM work that we have in our district. So, Dr. Norris.
All right, and as Dr. Norris is coming, just to preview what you'll see today, over the course of the last few months, our leadership team has been meeting to discuss the opportunities and challenges for the clusters that have experienced low enrollment and underperforming student outcomes. We looked at this from the lens of MNPS Next, but that effort has largely been tied to the Nashville Next work, which has more to do with land use planning than it does the quality of education. While savings from greater efficiencies are a component of what we looked at, I also tasked our team with helping to think through strategies that would improve educational outcomes at the schools in the Whites Creek, Pearl Cone, and Maplewood clusters. We don't want to just consolidate and forget about these schools. We want to bring families back to their zone schools by producing a better educational product that will result in the best possible outcomes for their children. That's why instead of calling it MNPS Next, I want to call this Metro Schools Reimagined, to really highlight some of the innovative cluster-wide approaches I'm recommending to help turn around the clusters. This feeds well into the work Dr. Sharon Griffin is doing for our schools of innovation as she looks at turnaround models for individual schools that will result in dramatic and positive changes for the students served. We hope that we can move many of these schools out of priority status under the leadership of great leaders. I see many of them with us today. But with the Metro Schools Reimagined, I want to have a strategy in place to build upon and extend the gains made from turnaround so we will see cluster-wide success for years into the future. The challenges we're seeking to address didn't happen overnight, and they won't be solved overnight. But with a renewed, intensive focus, I hope we can see lasting and positive changes for the schools and students in these particular clusters. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Norris to lead us through our presentation.
First, let me apologize. We are getting copies for you all of the slides so that you can follow along. So good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, distinguished board members, and Dr. Battle. Thank you for the opportunity to share the initial plans for Metro Schools Reimagined, which represents a continuation of MNPS Next. My name is Elisa Norris, Executive Officer of Strategy and Performance Management. In this role, I collaborate with other leaders to develop inclusive strategic plans that ensure vision and mission alignment with the district's key performance indicators. In short, I work with MNPS leaders to maximize systems and structures so that we can maximize student outcomes. MNPS Next was a holistic look at what is required to move the district forward, looking at short and long-term needs of students, families, and neighborhoods. This initiative was invested in determining how to improve student outcomes while taking inventory of the district's building capacities. So you see here on the slide a snippet of what MNPS Next was designed to do in its first iteration. The initial phase of MNPS Next then looked at the potential cost of building maintenance and renovation and issues connected with building under usage. Metro Schools Reimagined then transitions to an emphasis on academics with a look at new ways to support and bolster the good work that is already happening in our schools and clusters. Now we'll have Mr. David Proffitt, Ms. Casey Migo, and Mr. Ryan Latimer provide the board with an update concerning facilities. I will follow with an outline of Metro Schools Reimagined. Then Dr. Sharon Griffin, Chief of Innovation, will share Schools of Innovation updates. At the conclusion of the presentations, there will be time for question and answer.
Dr. Battle, members of the board, good afternoon. This first phase, the first piece of the facility implementation part is in 3 phases that coincide with the fiscal years 2021 through 22-23. The first part, the first phase is comprised of 3 pieces. One is centered around purchase of land, rezoning, and some fifth grade potential integrations in the schools, reconfigurations. The first piece, and it's the simple piece, and I'm the oldest one here, so I get the easy stuff, is purchase of land that Dr. Battle, in fact, just signed off on today for a buy-sell agreement for land in the Antioch cluster. In the Cane Ridge cluster, Cane Ridge Cluster Middle School, located on Mount View Road. So hopefully that will go to Metro Council for approval in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll own that piece of land. And its primary purpose, of course, is to alleviate the overcrowding in Antioch Middle School. So with that, that is the first piece. The second piece and third piece will be covered by Casey and Ryan, and I'll let them take that.
Good afternoon. A quick housekeeping question. Did you guys get a zoning overbrief in your board packet? I think I have enough, but if not, I will print some more and get those to you.
It's coming this way.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, y'all got, there's a map. They got that one.
Okay, thank you. The packet's a longer overview of this. I'm just going to hit on some highlights. And then basically, Thomas Edison is one of the most overcapacity schools in the district. They're currently operating at 122% of their use. They've grown by over 100 students since the start of 2018-19 school year. And we would like to reduce the overcrowding there by rezoning 150 to somewhere around 180 students into Smith Springs, which is operating at about 200 students under their capacity. We would propose this by having some community meetings to gather feedback from them and build a plan going forward, and we would like to have it in place for the start of the 2020-21 school year. The core areas shown on there aren't a formal plan. They're just kind of to highlight some areas that we could use as a jumping off point for discussions. It represents about 200 students, and it kind of shows the drive difference for them between Smith Springs and Thomas Edison. And again, if a plan were approved, it would rebalance these two zones, and they would both be left with a little bit of capacity for future growth. And I will turn it over to Mrs. Mego.
Brian. The final part of Phase 1 for the MNPS Reimagined is to consolidate Braemar and Jerry Baxter. Both schools are sitting at about 50%, maybe a little bit less than that capacity right now, and combining the schools at Jerry Baxter would bring them up to 77% capacity. I'd like to point out that you have, I know that you have on your desk in front of you this school consolidation study. I think this is version 5 of this, but it does go through the current priority KPIs for each building on the first 2 pages, as well as some of the operational data, student diversity, those kind of things. And then it will show the same map that's up on your screen on page 3. And finally, page 4 is an overview of what the school would look like in its consolidated state. This goes through a lot of the operational questions you might have, busing, that kind of stuff. So feel free to browse that, and you can ask questions at the end of the presentation if you have them. Some things I'd like to point out for you, though, is that you'll hear from Dr. Norris in just a minute about how efficiencies that are created by consolidating the school will be reallocated for other resources for the school. We have talked to the state. Jerry Baxter and Braemar would have recalculated accountability measures when we combine the school. So not just one school is going to overtake the other as far as their AMOs, but they will combine them and recalculate them for us. The combined school will remain in priority status if the board so chose. we could consider a name change. There's nothing kind of tied to a consolidation with the state as far as a name change goes. And then we do recommend that a reuse for the facility be decided before we move forward with the consolidation plan. We have talked about there is great need for office space for central office staff. We've talked to several departments about moving out to that building, but there's also a desire that we've heard for a community center. So, but right now there's no community partners identified. There would be a lot of work to kind of put that in place, but that is something that we have heard would be desired in the community. So then moving on to phase 2 and phase 3. Very simply, phase 2, we feel like we need to develop a district-wide rezoning and capital improvement plan for all clusters to move 5th grade back to the elementary schools. And you'll see also a preliminary study in front of you. And I'd like to point out that anything highlighted in green on this study is already included in the capital improvement plan. So for instance, the 100 student expansions of J.E. Moss Elementary School is already accounted for in our budget. Anything highlighted orange are new items that we've identified. And then purple items are things that we've identified that could come off of our current capital improvement plan. But next year, we really need to take a deep dive into this. This is just a high-level study. I mean, we can't go into Overton and just plop an elementary school in there, right? We know that, which is all this really kind of outlines. But we will need to take a deep dive and also wrap that into community engagement with the work that you're about to hear from Dr. Norris, as far as developing that comprehensive academic vision for the district. Yes, ma'am.
What are those colors again?
And you can see the summary on the last page. It outlines what they are. Yeah, I'm sorry.
There is a legend. Okay, we were like, where's the legend?
It's on the back.
Sorry.
No worries. And then phase 3, of course, is going to be implementation. There are some, you'll see from the study, some districts or clusters that we can go into right now and move 5th grade back. I think there's a lot of questions that we need to answer around that, but it's possible. And then also really building support and start getting into the community about why we're doing this. You'll hear some amazing things from Dr. Norris in just a minute about that academic programming that we want to kind of wrap into this facilities discussion as well. And then, of course, developing the capital plan and really getting support for that capital plan in the community. And so now I'll turn it over to Dr. Norris to talk about the academics.
All right, now that I got my jitters out of the way. So, as I begin my presentation, I would like to ask you to imagine a blank canvas. Close your eyes and imagine a blank canvas. Every blank canvas represents a myriad of possibilities until that very first brushstroke. Similarly, we approach the planning about Metro Schools Reimagined with the excitement of a blank canvas. What I'm sharing today is the canvas that is filled with our initial plans and ideas about the possibilities of Metro Schools Reimagined. We have used broad brushstrokes on this initial pass. As we continue with Metro Schools Reimagined, listening to feedback, collaborating, and learning from stakeholders, we will use finer brushes to bring to life the details of this initiative. So the vision then for Metro Schools Reimagined is to quite literally reimagine the ways in which MNPS provides equitable educational opportunities for all students in identified clusters through a synthesis of in-depth academic data dives, community input and feedback, and research about how to best support underserved students and communities. What we recognize is that any successful change initiative requires a theory of action. Why are we doing this thing that we're doing? So the question then for us with Metro Schools Reimagined is, what do we believe is required to move each cluster from its current state to a desired state? So for us, it has 4 components then. We believe that if district leaders and departments use a service model approach to providing personalized school supports with specialized understandings of student achievement data, school and family needs, community partnerships, and building climates and cultures, and if school-level leaders help teachers strengthen professional practices through providing quality coaching and feedback, developing cultures of candor and trust, and using data strategically, then teachers will be able to teach at the highest levels of effectiveness with a greater number of additional supports and resources, which will help students achieve SEL and academic learning outcomes. So to ground this work and to make sure that we are prioritizing these, we identified 4 strategic domains. Those domains are instruction, leadership, culture, and systems. And for each strategic domain, we identified an essential question, the question that we were trying to answer with this work moving forward. So the question then for instruction is, what are the instructional moves and academic programs that will create educational stability and increase student engagement and achievement? When we're thinking about leadership, we ask the question of, what leadership structures need to be established to better support cluster leaders, provide vision and focus, and promote collaboration across tiers? For culture, the question is, what strategies will improve fundamental beliefs and challenge prevailing assumptions about what is possible for students and families in these clusters? And lastly, when we think about systems, the essential question is, what are the systems that can align existing resources, strengthen community partnerships, and create new ways of meeting the needs of students and families in these clusters? Additionally, we contextualize our work around these components. And quite literally, these are components that we should always think about when we're thinking about improving student outcomes. Looking at student academic success rates from the vantage point of proficiency and growth. Also asking ourselves really tough questions about retention and recruitment. How do we get teachers here and how do we keep them? Right? Looking at the ways in which the character and the borders and boundaries of Nashville have changed, which then has an impact on mobility rates and also an impact in conjunction with mobility rates, looking at decreased enrollment, and then always asking ourselves, how do we improve our culture? How do we improve our climate? How do we create the space where people want to come and they want to stay, and especially can thrive in these spaces? And then also thinking about the limited supports and services. What do we need to do to reallocate, reimagine? What do we need to do to push this work forward? So the 3 clusters that we've identified then for this initial pass in Metro Schools Reimagined are the Pearl Cone Cluster, the Whites Creek Cluster, and the Maplewood Cluster. And we identified these clusters looking at the number of schools of innovation that are in the clusters and also asking ourselves questions concerning building capacity. And though we recognize that all of the clusters are different, of course, they have their own character and their own identity, we do believe that there are uniform strategies that can be employed across the clusters, and these strategies, we believe, will allow us to see positive impacts in student achievement. So you see on the screen all of the uniform strategies. What I want to do now is draw your attention to a couple, and so you'll see when I click, they're going to be bolded, highlighted. So the first one then is switching to a pre-K, K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12 school model, creating in each cluster a unified collective cluster leadership structure, also creating a cluster support network of internal and external leaders, looking at creating advocacy centers in all elementary schools with a special emphasis on SEL support staff and success coaches, imagining community partnerships for personalized literacy, and consistent instructional support for literacy as well. So while we recognize that there are different needs in each of the clusters, we do believe that these uniform strategies across the clusters will certainly pay out positively. So what does this look like then for each cluster? So for Pearl Cone, we recommend the creation of a unified music, city, arts, and health sciences cluster with an emphasis on advanced academics. To achieve this, we will establish a K-12 advanced academics pathway with increased advanced placement offerings, partner with colleges, universities, and hospitals, to strengthen health pathways through offering experiential learning experiences, leverage Music Makes Us to create experiential learning opportunities for all students, and create business and college university partnerships to expose students to technology, job opportunities, in music and health. And before I go on to the next 2 clusters, I want to reiterate that we looked into the clusters to see what is already working well. What are those systems and structures that are already existing, and how can we build upon those so that we can help our students achieve quickly? So that's what it would look like for Pearl Cone. For Whites Creek, we recommend the establishment of the Whites Creek Early College STEAM Academic Cluster, where students can earn dual credits and graduate with a high school diploma and an associate's degree. To achieve this, we will establish the early college STEAM pathway throughout the cluster, develop a focus on K-12 advanced academics, Cambridge, and/or dual enrollment, dual credit, partner with colleges, universities, and hospitals to strengthen health pathways through offering experiential learning experiences, partner with colleges and universities to create opportunities for all middle school students to participate in campus tours and visits, create opportunities for all students to participate in a STEAM expedition, and explore innovative staffing strategies. And lastly, but certainly not least, Maplewood. For Maplewood, we recommend that the Maplewood feeder pattern be established as a unified branded AVID program cluster with an emphasis on advanced academics and STEAM. To achieve this, we will develop an emphasis on K-12 advanced academics and advanced placement offerings, create opportunities for all students to participate in a STEAM expedition, partner with colleges and universities to create opportunities for all middle school students to participate in campus tours and visits, create instructional unity around AVID and STEAM programming, and explore innovative staffing strategies. So again, returning to the idea that we want to build upon what already exists. So the potential fiscal impact is minimal because this initiative relies on system structures and programming that already exist. Any additional costs will be aligned to professional development and training for teachers and staff in identified programs. So similar to the conversation concerning facilities, we broke this down into phases as well. So phase 1 is school year 2021. That's about immediate implementation, immediate results. What's working well? How can we take those best practices to scale? In phase 2, which is school year 21-22, we'll be looking at sustaining those best practices, creating progress monitoring so that we can ensure that we're moving in the right direction, and course correction should we need to. And then phase 3, it's about keeping it moving, right? Continued implementation and evaluation. And this will be our opportunity to review what has gone well, to reevaluate what didn't go as well as we would have liked, and to reimagine so that we can start this work all over again. It is all about continuous improvement, keeping it moving. So the next set of clusters will be selected based on Building Capacity Index, academic pathways, and student outcomes. Those clusters are Hillwood, Stratford, and Hunters Lane, Antioch, Cane Ridge, and Glencliff, and then finally Overton, Hillsborough, and McGavick. And so I also want to point out that for the first set of clusters, we will also be looking at reimagining the ALC spaces, and for the second set of clusters, we'll be looking at our non-traditional schools and spaces as well. So how can the board support this work? Advocacy. Let's share the good news. We know that there are great things that are happening throughout the district. So let's make sure that we're sharing that good news, connecting with those community leaders and partners who could support the clusters and mobilize local support for Metro Schools Reimagined. And funding, as is always the case, championing for more resources so that we can fund that professional development and training and keep it moving and keep the positive synergy that we believe, as is evidenced by all our leaders who are here today. We have an opportunity to really lean in and take advantage of this moment with Metro Schools Reimagined. So we invite you all to participate with us on our blank canvas. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Sharon Griffin. She's going to share with us some updates concerning Schools of Innovation.
Good evening, and thank you, board members, for the opportunity to provide you with an Office of Innovation Priority School update. Our objectives this evening are to set the historical context, to share current data, to review the ambitious goals, to outline how we will accomplish those goals, and to determine how board members can support us in those actions. I want to focus your attention on this slide for a few moments because I'd like to share some historical context because the accountability metrics have changed since 2012. Priority schools are defined as schools in the bottom 5% based on success rate. And success rate is how many students take the test versus how many students pass the test. What are the current metrics used to calculate success rate? First, one that you're very familiar with is achievement. We had 37 schools in Metro Nashville to be reward schools based on achievement. The next one is growth, with the third one being EL, our English language learners, and they take the WIDA test. The fourth one is grad rate in high schools, with the fifth one being chronic absenteeism, and that is the number of days a student is enrolled versus the number of days that they miss. And the sixth accountability metric is literacy and numeracy. You've probably heard of it in English and math, the TVAS score. Now, I want to also draw your attention to these metrics of how we got to 23 schools, because subgroups also play a critical factor in addressing and calculating our success rate. There are 5 subgroups that are also factored in. The first one is EL, our English language learners. The second one is students with disabilities. You may hear us say SWD. The third one is ED, economically disadvantaged students. The fourth one is BHN, Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans. And then the state puts those 4 subgroups together and creates a new one called the all group. As you think about those subgroups, they have targets as well as the accountability metrics. And if a school does not meet the individual subgroups, they become a focus or an ATSI school. That is additional targeted support intervention school. You can see in the slide that the list is run every 3 years. If a focus school does not meet those targets in 3 years, then they move into priority status. So as you look at this look at this slide, I wanted to explain how we arrived and got to some of those schools being in priority status. As you look at this next slide, we want to focus on continuous improvement. Every single student matters. Although I explained to you the way to get in priority status, I want to share with you that there are ways to exit priority status. As we think about continuous improvement and we look at this slide, we have 5 schools that in just 38 days, when we take the TN ready, that can move out of priority status. I want to take a few moments because those principals are here today, and when I call your school, just wave your hand, because these schools made a 4 or a 5 in literacy and math, and if they do it again, when they do it again, in 38 days, they can exit priority status. They are Warner Elementary, Cumberland Elementary, McMurray Middle, Amqui Elementary, and Tom Joy. So we want to give a shout out to those schools that can exit priority status. There are also 3 additional ways that we can exit priority status. That is scoring in the 15th percentile or higher in 1 year. We can score in the 10% success rate 2 years in a row. And finally, if a high school has a grad rate of 67% or higher, if it was that number or lower the year before for 2 years, they can also move out of priority status. Now, I just want to share a little bit about what we're doing and the success we're having. Even though we're not where we're supposed to be, this is a slide that we can all be proud of. As we look at our math academic growth relative to ED students across the state in grades 4 through 8, we can see right here in Metro Nashville, and those little yellow circles represent schools across the state. We have 6 schools that are in priority status right now that are actually scoring in the top quartile as it relates to priority school growth. Those schools are, big shout out, Warner, Cumberland, Buena Vista, Belshire, Tom Joy, and Amqui. If you're here, wave your hand. We also have in English language arts, that number doubled. 12 schools actually scored in the top quartile as it relates to their ED in grades 4 through 8 in the 18-19 school year. Just going to take a few minutes to call out those schools because we have to celebrate where we can. That is Warner, Cumberland, Churchwell, Alex Green, Jolton, Belshire, Madison, Amqui, Rosebank, Lillard, Haynes, and Tom Joy. I am excited to say that although we're not where we need to be, our priority schools are indeed making growth. Now, let's talk about our excitement, but in the same vein, we have to talk about how we scale up this success. We have to begin to spread it throughout our network, and we have a long way to go. We cannot do that without being intentional and deliberate. And every single day, Dr. Battle shares with us that we must provide experiences in every school, every day, to every student, so every individual need is met. Not because we are in priority schools, but because children are our priority. So what do we propose as you've heard all of this success that is happening as we begin to embrace our challenges? We propose a 10% reduction in priority schools in 2020, a 15% reduction in 2021, and a 20% reduction in 2022. Now, will that be easy? Of course not. And one thing that concerns us is the consistency of the turnaround model. You see, I am the 7th leader in 8 years. And so we have to begin to hone in on what is going to be our consistent model to address and attack schools that are underperforming. We didn't get here overnight, and it will not be fixed overnight. So what we are proposing is a 3-year timeline. Year 1, we have to stabilize our turnaround efforts. What does that mean? I want to really look to recruit veteran teachers who have the cultural competencies already to support some of the challenges that our schools have. We're looking to stabilize our student enrollment. We've got to increase it so that we can offer the courses that are offered across our city in schools that are not in high priority status. We've got to address the culture and climate as well as support our teachers and our leaders. Year 2, we have to ensure that the implementation and the execution is happening, and where it's not, we stop and reset. You see, turnaround is about time on task. And when you see challenges, we have to stop and address them as we look at the data that says we should be doing something different. And finally, in year 3, 22-23, we propose sustaining all of those great turnaround efforts with positive results, because one thing about turnaround versus transformation, you're not in turnaround unless a school is producing positive results. And so even as I think about those 5 schools exiting our priority status, we've got to think of ways to sustain and hone in on making sure that they do not re-enter that status. So what are we going to do? There are 7 levers of success in the School of Innovation. You can see those listed, and I kind of just want to focus and hone in on one, the intentional extended learning time, which is number 6, because a lot of times we think that extended learning time is just tutoring, it's interventions. But what we're proposing is a well-rounded student where we can also offer dance classes, chess classes, music classes, whatever it is, so that our students, because we know they have gaps during the day, so we're double dosing English, math, and science. And so we want to offer that to ensure that our students are well-rounded. Our MAG, our Measurable Annual Goals, MAGs for short, is just what Dr. Battle has explained are the KPIs for this entire district. Priority schools are not separate from the district. We have to be aligned with what the district is asking us to do, although we have some additional goals on this slide. There are 2 additional goals that we must address because we know that teachers and leaders, you are our most valuable asset. We have to do all we can to retain them. And we are proposing, it's a lofty goal, but we are proposing that the consistency of the model has to happen first with 95% of our teachers staying at our schools. We also have a second goal, in addition to the ones that Dr. Battle has set with the KPIs, and that is a double-digit AMO. We passed out the double-digit AMOs because in order for us to close the gaps and move out of priority status, we got to work twice as hard. Is it going to be easy? No, but it is possible. As we look at the next slide very quickly, we've also tiered our supports to ensure that our school leaders receive support as it relates to their leadership, their chronic absenteeism, which is an accountability metric. We can provide some additional supports, and of course, our culture and climate. So all schools don't receive the same type of support based on where they fall in the tiered support structure. Now, what does that look like? In August of 2019, we held a bridge conference with all of our principals. We also participate in the inquiry cycle, just like the rest of the district. We are not separate. Remember, I talked about resetting, a SWOT analysis. What are our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats? What's working, what's not, so we can reset and reset often. What is our attendance action plan? And we share that data with our staff and our principals on a weekly basis. And of course, we're working closely with the SEL team to do walkthroughs. There are additional supports based on data, and some of our principals have seen us more often in their schools lately because the data is yielding that we need to be there on the ground to support challenges that are happening in the schools. We also are having tailored one-on-one data reviews as well as intensive literacy and numeracy coach supports. And the literacy and numeracy coaches are here. Wave your hand. How will we get there? I want to take a few moments to really stay on this slide for a few seconds because Dr. Battle has shared with us her 3 levers for school improvement, and that is talent management, personalization strategies, and culture and climate. Now let's focus on talent management first. And if you look to the right of that big circle, you'll see that we have to recruit high-performing veteran teachers and leaders, and we want to incentivize them. We have to put the best and the brightest in front of our neediest students and support them if we really want to close the gaps. The second one, to my left on the screen, personalization strategies, is we are proposing a 3rd grade commitment. Now, what does that mean? Currently, our 3rd graders are only reading on a 28.8% proficiency rate. What we are proposing in the School of Innovation is recruiting our highly effective, high-quality K-2 teachers so that the gap that exists in 3rd grade and beyond, that either it doesn't exist or it's closed. And so we want to be deliberate and intentional with making sure that that happens. We know that every teacher doesn't need the same thing. So we have to differentiate professional learning, and we have to make sure that that happens. And last but not least, I've already talked about our specialized extended day, and here I'll focus on teachers. Because there are teachers that tell us, hey, I want to stay in my school. We can have some activities on the weekends even. They're willing to come. We pay. But they also said, at the end of the day, rather than pulling me out, I want to stay with the kids. So we want to have some specialized extended days. Finally, you heard that chronic absenteeism is an accountability metric that can get you in the bottom 5%. So we have to explore alternative transportation options for our students. We have to figure out if they don't get there the first way, how can we ensure that they get all of this great instruction from our teachers and leaders and support so that they make it to school? Secondly, you'll see what Dr. Norris shared, because we want to create those advocate centers in all of our elementary schools with a looping success coach. So our students, even in 3rd grade, have a mentor that's going to also hold them accountable. Now, I want to focus here because this slide is really, really, really important. This is the TDOE ASD Restructured support slide. This is our whole purpose for our sense of urgency, not just to close gaps for our kids, but the TDOE is restructuring the ASD, and they are looking to expand. The new list will come out in 2021, and then the fall of 2021, the ASD will announce school takeover, as you can see from the slide, with approximately 15 to 25 schools. Now, I've already shared to you some successes across MNPS, most reward schools in the state, fastest growing priority schools, 5 schools getting ready to exit. We can turn around our own schools. And so what we have to understand is this meeting that's going to take place on April 28th, and I'll share that location with you in the future. We have to monitor this timeline closely because we want to be the LEA of all of our schools. We know what to do. We've proven we know what to do, and we want to continue to do that. One place I wanted to kind of get you to hone in on this slide is I want you to look at the funding level. If you look at the funding level and you see the arrow that's above Tier 3 are ASD schools, you can see that the most money and the least amount of district autonomy is going to those Tier 3 ASD schools. So we have to be mindful of that. Finally, what can the board members do to support us around our priority school strategy? First, we need your advocacy. Second, we need funding. And third, we need policies aligned to our strategies. We have to rebrand the Office of Innovation. I've been on the ground now in the work for 7 months, and one thing that teachers and leaders have shared with me is that it's not popular to work in priority schools. And it's a place you go when you can't go anywhere else. Well, that stops now. And we want to rebrand that this is a place where some of our neediest kids only need an opportunity and an adult willing to serve. We also have to develop community partnerships with the philanthropics as well as the faith-based community. You saw our goals. They're not going to be easy, and we cannot do it in MNPS alone. We also want to ensure with all of our constituents by developing a priority school advisory committee. Board members, I need to lean on you. I need to know who are the nonprofit leaders, who are the philanthropic people I need to see, who are the faith-based leaders. We need a priority school advisory committee so that we can be sure to not only keep our schools, but that we can make sure that those gaps are closing and closing quickly. Funding. Funding has to happen all year. It cannot just be during budget season. For those of you that may not know, our priority office and the structures has not changed in 8 years. All of the funding that we get is from grants. If we're going to close gaps and close them quickly, we have to garner additional funds. Finally, policies. Policies have to be aligned to the initiatives and all of those strategies around talent and personalization in the culture and climate so that we can continue and sustain once we close those gaps. I'm going to conclude now by saying that school is all about the experience. Dr. Battle says it probably every day. It's about the experience. And after all that you've heard about the sense of possibility, about the success of our current MENPS schools, I, like Dr. Norris, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and to reimagine that every single school, and every student in every school, every day has every single need met. Not because they're in a priority school, but because children are our priority. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to your partnership. Thank you.
I just want to say, and I feel like you will join me in this, what two great presentations. Thank you so much. I want to ask all the principals, our staff that are here, that are close to getting off the priority list that you have already been mentioned, and we saw our wave, but I'd like for you to stand up and let us give you a hand around. Okay, yes.
I appreciate this focus on the innovation schools. I mean, I think everyone knows I still have a chip on my shoulder about my school, Neely's Bend, being taken over. I mean, we had a level 5 in growth, and people didn't recognize that. And the way Nashville talked about Neely's been and the way we talk about some of our priority schools is very frustrating. So I appreciate you calling that out as not just a talking point, but something that we should all be invested in, is making sure that we talk about our neighborhood schools, our schools of innovation in a more appropriate manner that speaks to the level of work and intentionality and really intense teaching that happens in those schools every day. So thank you for giving us our walking papers. If you do have a chance at some point, I would like to kind of hear other ways we can engage the council members in that same conversation, because I would love to see a council that sends their kids to their neighborhood schools, or, that supports neighborhood schools in some way. And, that can kind of ratchet up that conversation in the community. Just keep telling us what you need. Thank you.
Amy?
I want to say thank you to Dr. Griffin for all you've done for MNPS, coming in, stepping into perhaps one of the hardest jobs in the district. And so I salute all your energy and passion and hearing great things. I want to say that I am so encouraged to hear that we might put fifth grade back in elementary school.
Yes, yes.
I will not get emotional here, but my son had a horrible transition to fifth grade many years ago, pulled him out of his school, and he wasn't ready to be in middle school. And had he had another year at his elementary school, it would have been a different story. And so I know that is the case for so many parents who worry about moving their fourth grader into a middle school. And so if we can make it happen, I'll do whatever I can to help with that.
So to piggyback on Ms. Walker, I noticed that only, 1, 2, maybe 3 clusters were going to move fifth grade back into elementary school?
Ultimately, the goal is for this pre-K, K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12 school model to be across the district.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So if I'm not mistaken, a year or two ago, we did a cost study analysis on moving fifth grade back
Yes.
into the elementary school. Some schools are already crowded on a K-4 level, much less to, go back. It's like I said earlier about the custodial staff. It's that putting the genie back in that bottle, it comes with a price tag.
And we've taken an initial look at it. We actually, the study you're referring to, the one that you have in front of you today, actually updated that same spreadsheet. And so there are a lot of the same needs still exist, but the reality is we've seen a declining enrollment in the last 2 years, and our projections are only showing a continued declining enrollment. So it does make it somewhat more feasible. But the thing that I think is important to take away from the paper you have in front of you is that we already have identified a lot of middle school building needs. JT Moore needs to be expanded. HD Hill needs to be expanded. Antioch Middle. There is need at the middle school level, and so we have, I think it's $94 million. I'm sorry, I don't have the paper in front of me, but that amount of money has been identified for those projects. Well, all of those go away if we focus on K-5, and the delta is really only a small number. It's still a big number, but those are needs that exist in the district, regardless of if you go K-5 or you stay in your current model. It's just refocusing the money and the intention. But we need to make that decision now.
Okay, thank you.
Anna, I'm sorry, Amy.
I just want to say Dr. Battle is just knocking it out of the park tonight. I mean,
Yes.
Those are the conversations we have been dying to
Yes,
have for
yes.
years. So thank you to the staff who presented, and thank you for the focus. Ultimately, I think everything that we need to be doing should be focused around equity. I mean, that is the answer. There are different ways to get there, and we're talking about what we can do within the school, but really the ultimate answer is to get our schools better integrated. We need diverse schools. We need, and there's lots of research that says that socioeconomic diversity makes the biggest impact, but racial diversity makes a big impact. There are all these different areas that we need to be looking at. And so I think that's the direction that we're now trying to go with this Reimagine, because we are trying to figure out ways that we are keeping families in the cluster all the way through. I'm dying to hear more about how we're going to align the programming and extras. The other way to make big improvements is through these wraparound services, the community schools model, getting the greatest resources to the neediest children. So I was so excited to hear about all these extracurricular type activities that you're providing, because ultimately we want every child to be placed on the same playing field as a middle-class child that would have access to these extras, because that is going to help them grow and develop. And So anyway, I just want to commend everybody for starting to have these conversations. I know they're going to be long and complicated. And also, just want to say, in addition to all the work that we're doing in the schools, we've really got to focus on finding ways to create truly diverse schools and to try to address some of the socioeconomic challenges that we have within our schools, because what we have right now is it's very difficult to move the needle. I think everybody's aware of that. So thank you all for your presentations.
Yes.
All right, real quick, I know we have a few minutes. Also, I love, congratulations to our elementary and middle schools that are moving off the priority list. So congratulations again to you guys. And I would like to see the same work put into our high schools. I know that we did a wonderful presentation on our elementary, middle, but we really, really got a horn in on our high schools. And I know we've been working really hard on Maplewood and coming up with some great things and strategies around it, but we really need to focus and put that much effort into our high schools. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I had a couple of questions. I love, as someone else said, we heard before that, we did this big study with MNPS Next, and then we heard we can't afford it. So I love the fact that, parents overwhelmingly wanted fifth grade back in elementary schools. And so this is such great news to have a plan, a beautiful plan of how to do this, a very thoughtful plan. So thank you for that. And I understand from reading the material that was sent to us that is going to be a process that, like, for instance, at Dan Mills, we have, they very much want to have the fifth grade, but they've also, they're a school where, a choice school, so they've got so many people coming from outside their zone, and we'll have to adjust that. But at the same time, we don't want to create a situation where we've told parents, oh, you've got a place at Dan Mills, and then as it turns out, we're going to pull the rug out from under them. So that's not the case. The case is that this will take time, and we will do it very thoughtfully, and I think it's a beautiful plan. I did have a question about consolidating Jerry Baxter and Graymar. It looks like the plan right now is to close Graymar and consolidate this kids at Graymar into Jerry Baxter. Was there a reason for that rather than the other way around?
Yes.
We looked at both options. One driving force happened to be the football field at Jerry Baxter was one reason. Middle schools, typically we have that field, and we would have to transport the kids to someplace if they were in the Graymar facility. You want to add anything?
Yeah, we actually did a detailed analysis of both buildings. We look at the mechanical systems, the expected life of the systems, and at the end of the day, the facilities really are kind of apples to apples. One of them slightly bigger, but thinking about, we compared it to our educational specifications as well to make sure that they had all the program requirements that we would normally find in a middle school. And they really are almost comparable buildings. Again, from a facilities standpoint, the big difference, as Davis said, is that Graymar does not have athletic facilities.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then the school that, which probably will be Graymar, that will be vacated. I love the idea of making that a community center because that neighborhood needs a community center. So
Find the right partner. We thought it would be ideal. Of course, that'll be the difficult part in the funding for it, but it is situated right in the middle of a neighborhood, which would be ideal.
yes, that's great. Thank you so much. And yes.
Could I ask just two questions? One, you said you all will begin conversations with the Jerry Baxter and Graymar communities. do you all already have dates set for those, or will you be communicating those with families and community or area neighborhoods?
We haven't set any dates yet.
Okay.
That's part of phase one.
Gotcha.
Identifying those dates, identifying those spaces, identifying those communities in which we need to have these conversations. Yes, ma'am.
And if I could just add, it'll be phase two because there were initial community meetings prior to years past to get us to this point.
Yes, thank you.
And then lastly, I know that Dr. Gibb and Ms. McPherson, one was at Schwab, one was at Inglewood. Both have worked really hard. They're no longer at those schools, but I appreciate us being able to move them up to central office to really support the continued growth that they had already made at their schools and kind of spread those best practices. So thank you all also. I know we didn't shout you all out.
Okay, if there's no further business, we are going to adjourn. Our next meeting will be March the 24th. And shall we take about 5 minutes before we start our board meeting? Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.